Hello, I welcome you to IDD Talks. My name is Anastasia Lavrina, and our next guest now is Nicholas Walder, Chief Executive Officer and Editor-in-Chief of the International Affairs magazine, Any Global Media. So we talk a lot about the European Union role in the future negotiation process between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Several meetings between the leaders of two countries have been already held in Brussels. But what is the political situation in the European Union itself? Could you provide us more details about that?
Listen, I've been saying for about really even before COVID that the European Union project is in trouble, really in trouble, and I would say getting close to a point of no return for the EU. I'm even of the opinion that there is a very, very good possibility that the Union may not survive for much longer if it continues going down the road that it's in. The political situation is essentially this. The initial idea of the European Union from 25 years ago is dead. There are very few people who actually still believe in the whole project that was initially kind of dreamt of back in the late 90s and early 2000s. The ones that do still believe in that seem, well, I mean, to be polite, a little ridiculous. The world has changed. The political situation in the world has changed. The balance of power in the world has changed. The European Union politically has proven to be very unprepared for great power struggles and competition. Obviously, we're back to a status that was more similar to how it was during the Cold War. And the European Union is just simply not prepared for this. It was never designed to be prepared for this. It was supposed to be a post-Cold War project. What that has done is it has deeply divided the European Union into two or three very conflicting camps that bitterly dislike one another. There is the old core of the European Union, which is basically Western Europe, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Portugal, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Austria. They're still clinging to this idea that they can all be have a sort of consensus opinion on everything. But look, everybody understands the logic behind this, that is a little bit difficult. If you have 27 members of your family sitting around a table at having dinner, and they all have to agree on something for what they're going to have for dessert, and it has to be unanimous, it just simply is not going to happen.
I'm sorry, so inability to achieve the consensus in many issues can be considered as one of the main challenges for the European Union that the countries face today, right?
Any issue. It's the real problem is that there is no consensus on things. If you live in Lisbon and another person lives in Oslo and another person lives in Thessaloniki, you have ultimately and utterly different views of the world. You have different histories, you have different languages, different cultures. And in the case of Portugal, Norway, and Greece, you have three different denominations of Christianity that influence the culture: Catholic, Protestant, and Orthodox. Very few European Union theorists and philosophers took this into consideration, or they outright rejected it. Now, 20 years on, what you have is division of all kinds. So you have the core members of the and I guess you would call the founding members of the European Union, and the ones that devise the theory behind the idea of this sort of union project. And they're clinging to that, but they're looking more and more and more out of touch with reality. You have Eastern Europe, which were the latest, members of the European Union, who have a very, very different cultural, historical, and political perspective of what they want from their membership. And it is in complete conflict with the Western European concept. Eastern European countries have the idea that they are a part of European civilization. That's what they're interested in, that they're a part of the culture of Europe, but they're not necessarily in alignment with the social democratic European Union founding members from France or Spain or whatever. And they really don't understand one another. And then you have the aspiring members that are from the Balkans and from Ukraine, who have also a completely different experience, which was basically in the Balkans, obviously influenced by the wars that happened there after the break of Yugoslavia, and now Ukraine with the invasion of Russia almost 2 years ago, which has certainly influenced their opinion of wanting to be a part of European civilization. It doesn't mean that they want to be a part of the political or even some of the social movements that come out of Berlin or Amsterdam or Rome even. And so what you have is a very fractured, disjointed, and unless it starts to make some very drastic moves towards changing the way that they operate, the idea of being unanimous.
Then how does the European Union can act as a mediator in the conflict resolution? It doesn't matter whether we speak about Azerbaijan and Armenia in the region of the South Caucasus or any other part of the world. If the countries cannot achieve their consensus for any single issue, then how the European Union can act as a mediator?
Doesn't happen. Doesn't happen. Within the context of the conflicts in the South Caucasus, particularly with regard to Karabakh, I would say that the two sides are going to the wrong people. Nobody who wants to get anything done goes to Brussels because they simply don't have the ability to do anything. You have to remember that the European Union is a voluntary organization with no legal legislative ability to actually do anything. They can provide suggestions towards things, but the European Union actually doesn't have any legal authority to enforce anything. So the idea of going to Brussels to get something done, other than a symbolic gesture, it's a dead end. If you want something done, you go to Washington, you go to London, you go to Beijing, you go to Moscow. These are countries that actually have the legislative power to do something. And furthermore, they are also Security Council members in the United Nations. The European Union is not. And so this constant messaging of using the European Union as a conduit for solving or developing an architecture for resolving the conflicts in the South Caucasus.
It will be right to mention that the last planned meeting between Azerbaijan and Armenia in Spanish Granada didn't take place because of the biased position of France.
Yeah, well, exactly. France, once again, we get into the very deep, long story long way of doing things when you're talking about the European Union. See, the problem is with the EU is that it is dominated, and it is designed to be dominated by regulations and bureaucrats because it doesn't have any legislative authority. So what ends up happening is you get France, who has a very long history of being a part of an organization but acting in its own interest. An example of this is the fact that it's a NATO member. Well, for much of its history in NATO, it has been a massive thorn in the side of its NATO allies because it often goes off, especially under certain presidents like Charles de Gaulle, it goes off and does whatever it feels like it wants to do, due to the fact that it's looking out for its own interests. Now, with regards to the South Caucasus, it has been the only constant Western player in trying to be a mediator, though it quite obviously has a biased opinion on who should benefit from any kind of resolution that comes out of negotiations. Why is that? Well, um, one always has to take into consideration, and this is something that Azerbaijan does not possess, is that France has one of the largest Armenian diaspora communities in the world. And it has had for a long time. Many of the diaspora communities of Armenians in the West have more than 100 years of being a part of the body politique, if you want to say it in those particular terms, because there are representatives in many governments in different countries in the West that are Armenian. Azerbaijan doesn't possess this, so there's no voices on the ground to play devil's advocate and be counterintuitive to the narration that the diaspora community perpetuates. And this is a major hindrance to coming to some sort of an agreement or resolution if you're only getting one side of the story.
Right. We know about the influence of the Armenian lobby in different countries of Europe, including France, of course, the United States of America. But I think here we should also mention the role of the role of the colonial past of France and the high level of Islamophobia in the country.
It's true, and France has a very particularly French relationship with its colonial past. Its past as an empire, rather different from Britain's imperial past. France has never really gone through the process of proper decolonialization. And there was always this kind of imbalance in their view of what their colonial possessions meant to French society. And if you look at their relationship with their colonial past, it is still, I would say, kind of open-ended and unresolved. This is one of the reasons why they have societal problems with, you may not be able to hold me on the percentages here, but I believe it's somewhere between 10 and 15% of the French population now is first generation Muslims, mostly from North Africa, but also from other parts of Africa as well too. And this has played into a very complicated societal dialogue and conflict, because during the French Empire, if you were a part of the French Empire, you were a département of France. It was as if you lived in Paris, if you lived in Algeria. That's a kind of a different interpretation of empire than, let's say, the British and their possessions in India or Africa. This has given the French, I think, and also because they do have a very large Armenian diaspora, as I mentioned, this has given the French a hindered or complicated way of trying to approach the issue of resolving the problems in the South Caucasus. And the fact that they are really the sole Western power who has been doing this for the past almost 30 years, it has, I think, kind of colored their or tainted their ability to actually be proper moderators.
You are a veteran journalist, and it will be nice to know your opinion about the biased attitude of some Western media towards Azerbaijan.
No, as someone who's a veteran journalist that has been focused on the Caucasus for a very long time, since the mid 1990s, when it was a real powder keg of small and bloody wars that still remain unresolved in most cases. No, one thing that I am not inclined towards is being a conspiracy theorist. It is really just the result of the fact that the communities of diaspora Armenians are many generations uh, past the time that the initial wave of immigrants came. For example, in California and Los Angeles, which is my hometown, we're talking about people who have of Armenian descent that have been there for more than 100 years. And in their case, it is just the natural progression of the story being told again and again and again from one side for many generations. I think when I was growing up in the 1970s and the early 80s, I might have met one Azeri in a city of 15 million people. But there are more than 1 million Armenians in Glendale and in LA and things like this. They're just a part of the community. They're a part of the fabric of society.
Well, you are telling me about millions of Armenians who are living in Los Angeles, and there's not so many Azerbaijanis, maybe, but you decided to investigate, you decided to learn about the situation in the South Caucasus. So why other journalists decide to follow the Armenian propaganda rather than to investigate what's happening here?
Yeah, I mean that is also just my character. As a young man and as a little boy, I was always I approached things sort of like when you're peeling an onion. So there's the outer layer. I got to find out what's on the next layer, and the next layer, and the next layer. But that's kind of sui generis. I can't say that applies to everyone. And I do that with everything. I mean, that goes from the information that is told to me, and I'm okay. I want to know more about that. To the music I listen to, I want to know what the origins of that would be. But really, it's just the result of the fact that you have a community that's been a part of the fabric of society for a really very long time, and it has been. In the case of where I grew up, they have been a relatively influential part of society too, because they're a part of the agricultural community. They're a part of the small commerce and small business community. So they have a presence. And so what ends up happening is the generations pass, the stories get passed on to people who have no connection to the ancestral homelands of Armenians. But they've heard stories, so they're like, oh, well, that must be how it was. And it was in the case of the Armenian diaspora community, it was so bad for them, that's why they live here. And so it's not a conspiracy. It's just generational information that's been handed down and then seeps into the rest of society. And because the community of Azeris in places like where I grew up is microscopic, that process just doesn't happen. And so when you get people, my colleagues in the media, who end up being on television or writing for the New York Times or commenting as analysts like I am doing right now, when they do that, they've only, ever since they were very, very young, have only heard one side of the story. And so what ends up happening is what we see, which is a biased, even if it may be even unconsciously biased, view of events and development and where to go from here in terms of how you resolve the problem.
So what's, in your opinion, a key element for durable peace in the region of the South Caucasus? Should the West engage more in the processes taking place here?
Absolutely. For a very long time, and as I said, the situation in the Caucasus has been one of my specialities for a very long time. And there was a very brief period of time, I would say there were actually two brief periods of time where the West was relatively engaged in what was going on in both the North and the South Caucasus just after the Soviet Union broke up. And then As the war started breaking out in Karabakh, in Abkhazia, in Chechnya, the West sort of pulled back from being engaged in the South Caucasus. It was deemed sort of counterintuitive and against the narrative that was going on that the Cold War was over and everything was peaceful and things like this. But in reality, that was not the case. And so they sort of retreated from being actively involved in anything. And then very briefly in the beginning of the 2000s, there was another kind of engagement, primarily in Georgia, after the Rose Revolution in 2003. However, one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that the engagement in the Caucasus at that particular time was rather short, because for the most part, the United States realized that the Georgian situation was a little bit unpredictable, and also that the development that was going on there was a bit heavy-handed, anti-democratic, if you want to say it that way. And so they backed away. They never really engaged with Azerbaijan and Armenia, because France was involved, Russia was involved, and there was some impatience, I would say, from Washington with regards to everything that was going on in the three countries in the South Caucasus. Ever since then, the West has basically been absent from all matters that are important to the South Caucasus. And look, I am of the opinion that the West, particularly the United States and maybe the United Kingdom, need to be more involved in the South Caucasus, because they need to be a part of the country's development and progress towards some kind of sustainable future. All three countries in the South Caucasus. They are an alternative model to what China would offer and what Russia has been offering for 20 years, and which has not been very fruitful for anybody. And in the event that they are able to do this, in the event that they choose to do this, this has repercussions and positive outcomes across a whole swath of different parts of society. The development of the economies, the development of society, the development of stabilization, etc. You go all the way down the line, including things like educational development and exchanges and all sorts of things. There's nothing to lose for the West to be actually actively engaged, and really actively engaged, not just little pinprick sort of USAID projects here, there, and everywhere. It has to be a fully fleshed out and articulated policy towards the South Caucasus. Right now, there isn't one, other than energy. It has to go way beyond that. And I'm starting to see little signals here and there that this might be something that is kind of percolating in some ways, which is good, because just recently the reports were coming out from China that Belt and Road is going to be scaled back because the Chinese economy is in serious trouble. And now we have obviously a war in Israel, which is involving a lot of outside players. And so that there is the re-engaging with the South Caucasus is in the West's interest, because it is in the interest, most importantly, for the countries of the South Caucasus. There's again nothing to lose by developing the relationship and making it very robust, sustainable, and most importantly, lasting for generations.
Well, I thank you so much for joining IDD Talks today.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for having me.